Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 31 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Carolina Hurricanes and lost by a score of 3-2. This was the fourth and final game of this four-game gauntlet that the Sharks have been on over this last week that started off with a surprise victory against the Washington Capitals 2-1 in overtime, but then was followed up by an embarrassing loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning 8-1. After that was a matchup against the defending Stanley Cup champions, who they put up a slightly more respectable score of just a 3-1 loss, but was in fact just as bad of a performance as that previous game against Tampa. And so coming into this one against the Carolina Hurricanes, a team that has been dominant through the regular season over these last few years, it was a question of what level of play we'd see from the Sharks. Could they have a bounce back performance and go back to that semi-competitive level of play we've seen from them, or would they hang their heads and just get run over by a team that is admittedly significantly better than them? And what we actually did see was a strong outing from the Sharks. A 3-2 loss on paper looks quite close, but it was not a smoke and mirrors type of score like that previous game propped up by impressive goaltending. The Sharks actually had a very real chance of winning this game. You could make the argument that through the first 40 minutes, the Sharks were actually the better team. It was really just that third period where they allowed things to get away from them. But before we get there, we do have to start off in the first period where it is Carolina who does strike first, a goal from Shane Gostisbehere. And on this play is another issue that we have seen from the Sharks throughout this entire season. We've talked at length in the past about D-zone turnovers and neutral zone turnovers, things like that, and that remains a very real problem for the San Jose Sharks, as much as was seen in this very game here tonight against Carolina. But this is a little bit of a different beast. You see, the Sharks, they play more of a hybrid style of defensive hockey. It's a stylistic choice from Ryan Warsofsky, and it's not really unique. Many teams take this approach, but what it means is that the defensemen for the Sharks don't actually just stay stagnant most of the time and below their own face-off dots. They will activate, they'll play that man-to-man coverage if the situation calls for it. But because of this, the players on the ice for the Sharks do need to be able to make adjustments on the fly. It is a little bit more difficult than playing more of a standard type of D-zone coverage. So on this Shane Gostisbehere goal, we see Jake Walman move up the wall to cover his man. The rest of the Sharks players need to be able to recognize that and make the adjustments there. So for instance, we see Cody Ceci move from the right side of the ice to the left side of the ice down low to cover for where Walman should be, but we needed to see someone like Barclay Goodrow, for instance, come down from the blue line to hang back because Cody Ceci has abandoned that right side. We need to see Alex Wennberg also kind of prioritize the right side of the ice because the Sharks have overloaded the left side. But because neither of these two players actually do so, it is Shane Gostisbehere who is left all alone for this easy goal for himself, or at least this very easy chance on net. And if this was a situation, a mistake that the Sharks have had happen to them maybe once or twice this season, I wouldn't bother to bring it up, but it is a constant mistake in which the Sharks just leave entire quadrants of the ice completely uncovered because players for the Sharks are left puck watching and not actually making the adjustments that are necessary to do so. And this is a systematic problem for San Jose, not just individual errors, but something that comes down from top to bottom that the Sharks need to continue to work on through practice to actually really nail it in, because these are the types of mistakes that you'll see most actual good teams not make all that often. Now, the Sharks would tie the game up with a goal from Luke Kunin 1-1, but then we would see late in the first period the Sharks would make that same exact mistake. It is this time Henry Thrun who moves up the left side wall, Jan Ruda moves to the other side to cover, but it is Luke Kunin who doesn't come in deep enough, and as such it is Martin Necas who is left all alone in front of the net. Vanacek makes an incredible save to keep the one of the leading point scorers in the entire league off the board there. That could have made it 2-1 Carolina late in the first period, but the Sharks get bailed out a bit and they end that first 1-1. Besides those few shifts, I would say, in which Carolina were dominant, the Sharks actually looked okay in that first period, but they really brought it on in the second, where they were definitely the better team, and they would score the only goal in that middle frame, again from Luke Kunin, and it would be a 2-1 game at the end of the second period. Going into the third, the Sharks, they had a chance to put this game away, but they're going up against a really, really good team in Carolina. And I actually liked the effort that the Sharks brought in through these first few minutes of the third period. They weren't sitting back, they weren't turtling, they were actually bringing it to the Carolina Hurricanes. But the problem is, and the reason why you see so many teams usually kind of turtle on a lead in the third period, is because if you do end up playing a little bit too aggressively, you do open up these types of chances. So the Sharks' in neutral zone turnover leads to this kind of 3-on-2 situation, and while I do think it definitely could have been covered better by the Sharks, in particular Henry Thrun looked completely lost in this situation, it does end up burning them, and it gets tied up at 2, and that is the momentum shifter of the third period. The Hurricanes, they smelled blood in the water against the Sharks, ironically enough, and they really just pile it on after that. San Jose was actually managing to survive, and it seemed as though this might be a game destined for some overtime play where things could get a little bit of a reset and a little bit more open ice for the 3-on-3, but instead it is Jalen Chatfield who gets this goal and makes it a 3-2 victory for Carolina. Credit to San Jose, as they have done many times this season in the 6-on-5 situation in these last couple of minutes. They actually looked rather good and came pretty close to scoring, but not quite there for them, and so they do lose this game 3-2. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the Sharks top line of Eklund, Zetterlund with Granlund once again, the Lund line being reunited here, and we were expecting, maybe not an amazing game because Carolina is a very tight defensive squad, but you were probably hoping for a better performance than we actually did get. The first period, at the very least, for this Lund line was disastrous, to the point in which Warsofsky decided to bench both Eklund and Zetterlund for the latter half of that first period. And honestly, Granlund was no better. It's just, Warsofsky can't simply bench 3 players, especially your 3 first-liners, for an entire half period, so he does manage to maintain a spot there, but it's not as though he was all that great either. And so it was a question of how these players would actually respond to that benching going into the second and third periods. And we start off with Mikael Granlund, who he obviously didn't get benched, like I mentioned, but he wasn't playing very well to start, and I don't actually think he finished this game off particularly well either. This was a bit of a weak outing for Granlund. It's not as though there were 0 good plays. He actually had a very nice, soft, short pass in the neutral zone, I believe, back in the first period that set up a decent chance eventually for Tyler Toffoli on that rush chance. So, it's not all terrible, but there really wasn't a lot of good things being done by Mikael Granlund. And it's quite interesting because just yesterday, as I mentioned, the Sharks, they traded away Mackenzie Blackwood, starting goaltender. He's someone who has been so good for the Sharks this season, but Greer was willing to give him a chance to compete for a Stanley Cup this season by going to a contender like the Colorado Avalanche. One would think Mikael Granlund, who has also been very good this season, who could have the possibility of being moved at the deadline if he so wishes, that he would be kind of encouraged by the fact that Greer is willing to make a move like that, and that he would raise his level of play even further to really open up those trade possibilities. And so for him to come out the very day after and just put up a very not good performance, one of his worst of the entire season, was a little bit surprising for me. When it comes to his winger, Fabian Zetterlund, who did get benched in that first period, he also didn't really respond all that much. His second and third periods were really not that much better. He ended up finishing out the rest of this game. There were no other benchings for him, but there wasn't a ton to love here from him. The player who did respond, however, was William Eklund. He was not good against Tampa. He was not good against Florida, and he started this game off very poorly as well. Basically, I don't know if it's a coincidence or what, but ever since he got snubbed from the Four Nations tournament, he hasn't looked very good. But once Warsofsky sent that message, did not play him for the last 9 or so minutes of that first period, he finally did respond, and he put up a really impressive last couple of periods here. He set up on his patented William Eklund move of going behind the net and then passing it back to the other side to catch the goalie going the wrong way. That set up Luke Cunnin for that second goal of the game. And just generally, he had multiple great chances, a 2-on-1 with Celebrini, a 3-on-2 that then Thrun makes a weird play on, but still pretty good. And so Eklund, I very much enjoyed how he was able to actually play out the last 40 minutes of this game. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, we had Celebrini and Toffoli with Klim Kostin, so an interesting new look here. This is actually a line that the Sharks ran all the way back in the first preseason game of the season, so it seemed as though Warsofsky from the get-go wanted to get these 3 players together, but of course the major problem is that Klim Kostin proved to not be a very reliable player in the early parts of this season. But now that he has been playing better. It's something that Warsofsky has gone back to. And we start off with Macklin Celebrini, who has been struggling in the first period of these last few games, but has usually managed to kind of come back and end up finishing pretty strong. Here tonight, however, he started off strong and he ended quite strong as well. Macklin Celebrini, every single time it felt as though he was on the ice, he was trying to make something happen. He was explosive offensively. There were real fireworks many times over, and you can definitely tell just based on the ice time that he was getting here tonight. Over 22 minutes of ice time by Ryan Warsofsky. That is the type of move that when Celebrini is rolling, when he's skating, he is clearly the best player on the San Jose Sharks, and he gives you the best chance of winning if you put him on the ice. So in games in which he has that amount of ice time, it's because he is playing so well. So I would say he was probably the Sharks' best forward. He gets the assist on that first Luke Kunin goal as he skates by just two Hurricanes players in the neutral zone, makes it look easy. There were multiple other moments. This doesn't necessarily mean as though there were zero mistakes for Celebrini. We still see the classic moves of him trying to do a little bit too much, trying to carry pucks out of his own zone himself, even if there's a situation to make a very simple pass out. And so he got snuffed a couple of times there. He also was making some passes to nobody in the offensive zone. Again, something we've seen from him multiple times, but more often than not, he was a direct positive for the Sharks. And so I was impressed with what he was able to do. Tyler Toffoli, I thought, was a pretty good compliment. Not maybe as great as he looked in his previous time with Macklin Celebrini on the same line, but I think we're going to kind of work towards that. He did still get a couple of really great chances, one in the first period where he gets robbed by Kochetkov, and then another one I believe he hits the post in the second or third period as well, so he probably could have had a goal with a little bit more puck luck, and so I was somewhat impressed with what Toffoli was doing. And then when it comes to Klim Kostin, you know, there was a lot of good here tonight. There were some plays where Kostin looked quite solid, and I actually liked the chemistry he showed with Macklin Celebrini. But then there were also some moments in which you're kind of just scratching your head about what Klim Kostin was really thinking in this one. He gets called for 2 penalties, so we know that the discipline has always been a major issue for Kostin this season. The first one, I mean, this wasn't even a real penalty. I have zero idea how this was ever actually called for interference. Just an extremely silly call, and it makes no sense. But the second one he gets called for, the holding, I appreciate the effort being there. You know, he doesn't want to let his man just get freely to the front of the net, but there needed to be more defensive positioning here so he's not forced to take the holding penalty. So I've liked the effort from Kostin, and I like some of the good things he's been able to do with the stick handling. He actually had a few moves where he's able to get away, and the puck protection as well is up there, but he just needs to be a little bit smarter on the ice, I will say. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we had Wenberg playing with Kunin and with Barclay Goodrow. So Goodrow returns to the lineup. He takes the spot of Ethan Cardwell here. And this third line that we have seen at times this season is reunited. Now, Kunin does score 2 goals in this game, but that's not really off of the back of this third line. It's not as though Wenberg and Goodrow are getting those assists. The first one was off of a Macklin Celebrini primary assist, and the second one was off of a William Eklund primary assist. So Kunin being bounced up and down the lineup here, getting multiple shifts with multiple different players, and it benefited him for sure being able to pick up these goals. He had multiple grade A opportunities in this game. There were those defensive errors that I mentioned earlier on in the first period where Kunin is maybe just not adjusting fully correctly in the D zone. It's something that has been he's been kind of touted as this strong defensive player, and while I do see that at times facing off against weaker competition, against stronger competition, he's not that great. So that could perhaps lead to those problems. But generally, I still thought this was a pretty good game for Kunin, obviously, with getting these 2 goals. So offensively, there was a lot to like here. His 2 line mates, though, since they didn't really contribute much in terms of offense with Luke Kunin, they're a little bit lagging behind. Goodrow had that mistake on that Gostisbehere goal for sure. He should be the one covering in that situation, so I wasn't really impressed with Goodrow there. Otherwise, I don't think he did much good or bad in this game, and the same would go for Alex Wenberg, who was just generally okay. And then when it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, we have the newest face of the team. It is Sturm and Delangere playing with Kovalenko as he takes Carl Grundstrom's space on this fourth line. Now, the fourth line for the Sharks recently has actually been pretty good. Not amazing, but they've had some few good shifts here or there, and I thought that did somewhat continue here tonight. Kovalenko, like with Klim Kostin, had a lot of good and a lot of bad in his game. He had a few nice plays in the offensive zone, a great takeaway in just the first few minutes of this game to set up a great chance for that fourth line. We saw him actually get some shifts high up in the lineup. He got some time on the ice with Macklin Celebrini, so it seemed as though Warsofsky thought he was a little bit unlocked there, trying to give him a chance to prove himself. But then at the same time, we also saw some poor responsibility with the puck, some giveaways in the defensive zone right to a Carolina Hurricanes player, and then that neutral zone turnover that led to the Brent Burns goal that eventually tied this game up. And so not a perfect flying colors pass here for Kovalenko, but at least a decent building block game, I would say. It'll be interesting to see if he ends up maintaining a spot on this fourth line or if he gets boosted up the lineup at some point. When it comes to the two other players here, Sturm, Dellandrea, a pretty good game that goes around with what I mentioned about Kovalenko. When it comes to the defensive side of things, we have the Sharks' top pairing of Wallman and Ceci. And when it comes to Jake Wallman, I actually want to talk about a couple of plays he made here in the third period. And this is definitely one of, if not my biggest pet peeve in the NHL, is when a player goes behind their own net. And so that alleviates a lot of the pressure. You know, maybe the other team is changing, maybe your team is changing. You take multiple seconds for yourself to draw up a play. If you're going to take that time behind your own net, you better make sure you're actually making a good play with the puck. And we saw Wallman first have a terrible turnover right up the middle that led to some good chances for Carolina, though ultimately not a goal. And then just a couple of minutes later, we see Wallman make the same type of play, but this time ice the puck down, and that does end up leading to a Carolina Hurricanes goal. And so this is two moments in which Jake Wallman has all the time in the world to make a significantly better play, and he ends up making a mistake in both situations. And this is not the first time we have seen Wallman have these types of errors in that exact spot. So again, if you're going to take the time multiple seconds behind your own net, you should be able to make a better play than that. There's no pressure here. There's no anything like that. You have all the time in the world. It just doesn't really kind of, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, seemingly, in this type of situation. So Wallman has been great for the Sharks this season. I'm not saying that this is a huge, major problem for him, but it's something definitely to work on. When it comes to his teammate Cody Ceci, I thought Ceci really struggled out the gate in this first period. He was not very good. The second period, I actually thought he improved significantly. He was the Sharks, one of their better defenders in that second period, but then he kind of fell off a cliff once again in the third and was not very good. So an extremely up and down game for Cody Ceci. When it comes to the Sharks' second defensive pairing of Liljegren and Ferraro, I actually thought this was probably their best one of the game. Liljegren in particular really stood out in a positive way. I thought he actually made a lot of really good plays through the first 40 minutes of this game. In the third period, there was a little bit more struggle because, of course, the Sharks were hemmed into their own zone so significantly. But I thought Liljegren was, at least in comparison to the other Sharks defensemen, one of the better players for them. And so I'll give him that for sure. That one play that kind of stands out a bit is him trying to cover Svechnikov moving around the net. Yeah, he does lose that positioning right at the end, which gives Svechnikov that chance in front on the wraparound, but he did prevent the original shot in the first place, just didn't quite have the speed to keep up. So, it's the type of game that Liljegren has been playing thus far this season, ever since being acquired from the Toronto Maple Leafs, that he seems very, very close to getting there and being a consistent top 4 defenseman. There's just those couple of issues that have propped up occasionally, but I still thought this was a pretty good game for him. When it comes to Mario Ferraro, he had a great start here tonight. The first 2 periods, I thought Ferraro was making a lot of really smart moves, not a ton of errors. But then in the third period, the Sharks are hemmed into their own zone, and this is where Ferraro has those massive issues because when the team is under onslaught and you have 30 seconds left and you just need to kind of survive, Ferraro is a decent defenseman to do that because he can block shots, he can make hits, and he can tie pucks up along the boards. But when you're kind of hemmed in your own zone consistently over an entire period, Ferraro is not going to be helpful in actually being able to clear that puck out and actually getting your team back on the right foot. And we saw that very much on display in this third period. Many errors, many issues clearing out of his own zone. And so Ferraro, there was a lot of good here in the first 40 minutes, like was with the entire team, but he was a major problem for the Sharks in the final 20 minutes. When it comes to the Sharks' third defensive pairing, it is Thrun and Ruda yet again. And Thrun, he had been a little bit better as of late, but here tonight, I don't think it was really it for him. As I mentioned, just a really bad mistake on the Brent Burns goal. It gets caught puck watching here. He should be much more aware of where Brent Burns is on the ice. He doesn't need to challenge Aho as much as he did because he's got guys coming back on the back check, but Thrun ends up kind of in no man's land and doesn't do either play correctly. And so that was not very good for himself. And interestingly enough, we did see the Sharks actually call up Shakir Mukhamadullin today to join San Jose, and they sent down Jack Thompson. Now, this is a move that does make a decent amount of sense. We've seen Warsofsky's heavy reluctance in actually benching Jan Ruda this season, and Jan Ruda is a right-handed defenseman, and so is Jack Thompson. And so the times in which Thrun has stepped out of the lineup, Thompson has been forced to step in on his offside. But now with Mukhamadullin being that seventh guy, he's a lefty. He can replace Henry Thrun in the lineup and actually be comfortable doing so. And honestly, with the way that Thrun played here tonight, I wouldn't be surprised to see Mukhamadullin in the lineup for the next game. When it comes to Jan Ruda, there really isn't anything good here, but as we know, Jan Ruda somehow escapes all criticisms when it comes to the coaching staff. And then finally, we have the Sharks goaltender Vitek Vanacek. There were some worries yesterday from Sharks fans that the Sharks trading away Mackenzie Blackwood, who has been so good for them this season, to kind of lean on Vanacek to be their new de facto starter, at least the 1A to Georgiev's 1B, was going to not look good because Vanacek has not been great this season, especially as of late, but he actually stepped up in a big way here tonight. Yes, the Chatfield goal wasn't great. Maybe he could have come up with the big save on the Gostisbehere goal, but he had no chance on the Burns one, and he made a lot of very, very big saves for the Sharks in that middle part of the third period when they were just completely under siege in their own defensive zone. So I would be very appreciative of what Vanacek was able to do here tonight, and he was definitely one of the Sharks' better players. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday, where they'll be taking on the St. Louis Blues, the sixth and final game of this six-game road trip, and also the third and final game against this St. Louis Blues team this season. And we're not even at the halfway mark. Both times prior, the Sharks have lost in overtime, which was in game 1 of the regular season, 5-4, and then a shootout loss in Askarov's debut with San Jose. So the Sharks will be looking for some revenge there. Class dismissed.